Welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Coming to you this morning from Beirut, in Lebanon, the troubled Middle East.
People of America, this is the President of the United States. You are listening to George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. George is a Scotsman, and like me, an Irishman. Enjoy.
Mind you, he's got a few problems of his own, doesn't he, President Barack Obama? Struggling in the polls, struggling in Wisconsin, as we discussed last week, struggling with the economy, and the Mitt Romney camp out fundraising him by many factors to one. That's one of the issues I'm sure we'll touch on today. Just what's going to happen in November in the United States. What's going to happen to the presidency of Barack Obama. I'm speaking to you, as you will have heard, from Beirut, capital of Lebanon, just down the road from Syria, where there's a civil war raging. And, of course, at the center of an Arab region which is still convulsing in revolution. Some of it 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Some of it 2 steps forward and 5 steps back so far. But it's a long way to go. We'll be discussing that and these issues as we normally do. We'll be discussing, too, the political and economic situation in Europe. The left has won the election with an absolute majority in France, so we now have a so-called socialist president and a so-called socialist parliamentary majority. So what they're going to do with it? Is it the end of Merkozy? Is it the end of the neocon, neoliberal consensus of Angela Merkel and President Sarkozy? Will France now strike out on a new course? And what will that mean for the European Union's relations with Greece, which is itself convulsing in what sometimes looks a bit like revolutionary fervor itself? All of these coming up over the next 60 minutes or so on the mother of all talk shows with me, George Galloway. Aoife is in New York, as always, and without her, there wouldn't be a show, handling with her usual aplomb and panache. 212-209-2900. That's 212-209-2900. That's the number to call me to participate in the mother of all talk shows. My apologies for any shortcomings in the line. Last week we were on ISDN. This week I'm at the Al Mayadeen TV studios because I now present a fortnightly television program in Beirut for Al Mayadeen. That's Mayaden. It's an absolutely fine channel, and if you're an Arabic speaker, you'll definitely want to make sure that it's on your dial. So thanks to Al Mayadeen for giving me this telephone. My apologies for any shortcomings in the line. Okay, do we have our first caller?
Yes, you do. You have Generalis from Staten Island.
Generalis in Staten Island. How marvelous it is to be able to say that. Go ahead, please.
All right. Well, thank you, Izzy, for remembering me, and welcome back, George.
No, you're welcome.
I'd like to talk to Wisconsin and have George translate what happened out there in the recall vote. What I'm reading in the newspaper is that voters think there shouldn't have been a vote because this Mr. Walker didn't do anything wrong. But I believe the recall vote was the voice of labor. And I think when you mismanage your state government, any state, the most cowardly thing you can do is go after labor. George, please, translate for us.
Well, let me translate it as best I can. The recall tactic is a tactic. It may not have been, in retrospect, the best tactic in Wisconsin. And certainly President Obama didn't believe that it was the best tactic, and he was proved to be right. I still believe, as I said last week, that he was wrong not to get involved in the campaign once it had been triggered. But it may be that what looked like a good idea when the signatures were being collected to force the recall vote was no longer a good idea by the time that the vote came to happen. And not the least of the reasons is that the right wing, the Republicans, managed to out-fundraise by 17-1 the money that the Democrats were able to fundraise for the recall vote. So That's one important factor and lesson that we need to learn, that politics costs money. And if you're going to get involved in a political battle, you have to at least be able to be within touching distance of your opposition in terms of spend on advertising and so on. 17-1 is a truly gigantic gap. And, of course, if your opposition are drumming political advertising into the heads of the whole population of the state over and over again with that vast treasure chest, you're going to be up against it even in the best of times. It may very well be that it was the wrong tactic at the wrong time. But more importantly for us, it's a reminder that right-wing ideas are not dead, that the Occupy movement did not speak for the 99%. It sought to, it wanted to, it ought to, but it didn't do. And if we don't know that, we're fooling ourselves. And if we're fooling ourselves, we're fooling the people. The 99% is filled with people who are imbued with what Marx called false consciousness. They do not identify themselves with what is objectively their own interests, and they vote consistently against their own interests. And many of the people who voted for Walker will soon find that their jobs too are lost, that their rights, insofar as they still have them, to collective bargaining and to welfare provision and health care provision and so on, all the things that were at stake in Wisconsin, many of the people who voted for Walker are going to discover that they too have shot themselves in the foot in thinking that they were shooting other people in the foot. So perhaps it's a useful wake-up call, Generalis. Perhaps it's a useful antidote to any euphoria that we might have felt that right-wing neoliberal economic ideas and that the Tea Party and so on were dished, if you'll forgive the pun. Well, we were wrong about that, and maybe it's just as well that we know that before November, because what it means is obvious enough, that the presidential election race in November is going to be much closer than many, including me, thought that it was going to be, and that there is the very real possibility of a right-wing victory in the presidential elections. And if that doesn't concentrate the mind, well, I don't know what would. Thanks very much for the opportunity to dilate on Wisconsin once again. Ife, do we have a second call?
Yes, you have Josh from right here in Washington Heights.
Excellent. Josh in Washington Heights, go ahead, please.
I think that I understand the basis of the United States economic crisis as a result of 30 years of the American public through offshoring of jobs, through anti-labor policies that have limited the purchasing power of the population, combined with the huge war expenditures and the refusal to tax the wealthy. I don't understand what the parallels are with Europe, and I'd appreciate if you could give a capsule summary of your view of what is that, the same factors at play in Europe, or is there another basis for what's happening that's causing this economic distress?
Well, I think, Josh, that we are all victims on both sides of the Atlantic and around the Mediterranean rim where I am now. Even in Lebanon, they followed the same fool's gold of the same model of free market capitalism, which was overly dependent, in the case of Britain and the U.S., massively dependent on what they call financial services and what I call jiggery-pokery, the playing around with numbers on computer screens and calling that economics, calling that production of wealth, creation of wealth, when, of course, it's merely the creation of numbers on a screen. This gigantic trade in derivatives and all these different quote-unquote products. I always have to laugh when I hear financial services people talking about products. A product is a thing you can touch, you can hold, you can use. Financial services ain't products. They're just smoke and mirrors. And they depend upon this kind of pyramid selling, which, as we know, in real life pyramid selling down on the street in the neighborhood, very often come tumbling down. And because we were so heavily dependent on that, in your case, exporting jobs, in our case, committing suicide with those jobs. When Mrs. Thatcher came to power in England in 1979, she was an early practitioner, if you like, a harbinger of Ronald Reagan's voodoo economics, as George Bush I called them. And these voodoo economics required Britain to systematically commit industrial suicide. And we destroyed our own industrial base so as to export capital in financial services and in property and other unproductive parts of the economy, whilst closing down the manufacturing sector. And Britain lost 1/3 almost, of its industrial capacity in the 17 years that Thatcherism ruled in our country. And those 17 years were followed by another 10 years in which Thatcherism by another name was implemented by a party still calling itself Labour, but actually being the antithesis of Labour. So, in my opinion, the model is so profoundly flawed that we need to go back to square one. The second reason is debt. On a personal level, the British are the most indebted nation in the whole world. The British have more credit card debt, which they pay at about 30% interest, by the way, than anybody else in Europe, and I expect more than North America also. Personal indebtedness, national indebtedness, the carrying on as if there was no tomorrow, buying now, paying later, even though the ability to pay later was way off the radar. And that because we had grown to worship things, grown to believe that buying and acquiring more and more things would make us happy. And in fact, it didn't make us happy at all. And now that the credit card bill has come in, we're just about the most miserable people on the earth. Thirdly, in the Eurozone, and Britain's not in the Eurozone, of course, this is all compounded by the first two conditions obtained, but it's all compounded by the foolish attempt to create a single currency in a widely divergent economic zone, so that a country like Bulgaria or Slovakia, which has an extremely different and one would argue more antiquated, old-fashioned economy than, say, Germany in particular, to have the same currency in both these countries, operating in both these countries, with a European Central Bank which follows the voodoo economics mantra to the limit, was always doomed to failure. Greece is the obvious example. The Greek economy just is not in the same universe as the German economy, and yet they're employing the same currency and governed by the same central bank. And, of course, the failure in the Eurozone to harmonize their tax and spend policy, which is inevitable given some countries are very rich and some countries are quite poor in the Eurozone, meant that this was an accident waiting to happen. And it's all coming tumbling down. Greece will virtually certainly exit from the Euro in the next few weeks. And it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that Spain will not collapse similarly. They've just had a 100 billion euro loan bailout, we would call it. The Spanish don't like to call it that because of reasons of pride, but that will not be enough, because once the domino falls, I think the Spanish, then Portuguese, then Italian dominoes become very precarious indeed. And so the most likely outcome, by the end of this year, by maybe this time next year, there will be two zones in Europe. There will be the inner core of the European Union who will still be using the euro, and the outer core, the Mediterranean countries and others, I predict, will be outside of the euro. And that will have very, very profound implications. And it will cause mass unemployment in the peripheral countries. Those in the inner core will probably suffer something similar. And of course, if Europe is slumping, not just in recession, but slumping into depression, that will have its impact across the Atlantic in North America. So I say that people should not underestimate the gravity of the state of the capitalist system today, and therefore should not be surprised if quite dramatic political developments happen in Europe. And they might be good, those developments, or they might be bad. They might be progressive, or they might be fascistic. You may be watching the situation in Greece, where a fascist, overtly fascist party, which gives Hitler salutes and wears Hitler-type uniforms and has an emblem that looks very much like the swastika, are on the rampage in Greece. One of their members of parliament, no less, threw water in the face of a socialist member of parliament on national television just the other day, and then punched another member of parliament, both of them women, by the way, punched her, not once but twice, on national television, and then ran away. And they have just issued a statement that they're going to raid the Greek hospitals looking for immigrants to drag them out of their beds, because they cannot accept that immigrants should be being treated in the health service in Greece. So we mustn't imagine that progressive is necessarily the default position that will emerge in these economic conditions. Sorry for the long answer, Josh. I hope it helped. Aoife, do we have a third?
Yes, you do. You have Sandy Boyer, who's one of the hosts of WBAI's Radio Free Aaron.
George.
Sandy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. How are you, brother?
Good, thanks. And I want to offer my very belated congratulations on your re-election to the House of Commons. Richly deserved. It's where you belong.
Sandy.
And
I didn't catch that last bit. Go ahead.
I was just congratulating you on your re-election to the House of Commons and saying that's where you certainly belong. And I'm hoping that you'll use that position to speak out for Marion Price. You probably know she's a political prisoner in Northern Ireland. She's interned for all practical purposes. No trial, no sentence. She could even be in prison for life. And I think it could make a real difference if you would speak out for her.
Well, if coming from you, I have to listen to that. I was in Ireland very recently, in Dublin, and I'll be in Belfast, in West Belfast, on the 8th of August.
8th of August.
Speaking there. I'll look more closely into this case, Sandy. I'm a long-time ally of Sinn Féin.
Well, Sinn
as
Féin
you know.
is supporting her.
So I'm supporting the political process. I'm supporting the line of the Ardèche and the leadership of Sinn Féin.
Well, Sinn Féin
Marion is not, of course,
demanding her release.
part of that line. But that doesn't mean that I can accept that she should be incarcerated in inhuman conditions.
No,
so let me look more closely at that when I'm in the north of Ireland on the 8th, Sandy. How does that sound?
That's wonderful. I want to say Sinn Féin, who do not agree with her, have called for her release, as has the Irish Congress of Trade Unions.
In that case, there should be no barrier to my getting involved in that campaign, Sandy. I give you my word that I'll deal with that when I get back from Beirut.
Right. How may I just forward you some information?
I'm sorry, say that again, Sandy.
What's the best way to forward you some information on the case?
Yes, please do. If anyone wants to write to me, send it to gallowayg@parliament.uk.
Will do. Thanks so much,
very
George.
much, as always, from Radio Free Aaron. Very beautiful word and a very beautiful name for a girl, don't you think, Sandy? This is the mother of all talk shows. This is George Galloway. This is WBAI.
People of America, this is the President of the United States. You are listening to George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. George is a Scotsman, unlike me, an Irishman. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Ife. 212-209-2900. That's the number to call. Sorry about the quality of the line. I'm in Beirut, in Lebanon. Thanks to my friends at Al Mayadeen TV. You can follow them on Twitter and on Facebook, and they're well worth following. So 212-209-2900. That's the number to call. Ife, do we have a fourth call?
Yes, you do. You have Doug from Staten Island.
Staten Island again. I always love to hear those words, Staten Island. Go ahead, please.
Hello, George. How are you? It's nice to speak to you again.
I'm well, thanks.
And also, my congratulations on your re-election there. It's good to have a
Thank you,
person with
Thank
your
you.
voice speaking
6
out
times
there.
I've been elected now. I must be doing something right.
There you go. There's still hope. On that same note, segueing, don't give up on the labor movement too early, George. Here in the United States, there's a quirk in Wisconsin's law that allowed Walker to not only start bringing in donations, but to advertise for 5 full months before there was even a decision on who the Democrats were running. So he had this all in, he had the airwaves inundated with this whole mindset that it was illegitimate to have a recall. And when they did the exit polls, they found that 60% of the people said that they were voting. One of the big things they were voting about was that the illegitimacy or their tiredness of constant recalls, which is what they got from the advertisements.
So tell me this.
86% of them, George.
Tell me this.
86%.
George, do you think that we should not be pessimistic, therefore, about the result of the recall vote? Because, as I understand what you're saying, I can't hear you all that clearly.
George, can you hear
there
me
were
better
many
now?
people who are not necessarily Tea Party, right-wing individuals who nonetheless voted for Walker because they didn't think that the recall was justified. Is that your point?
Yes, and George, 86% of the people said that they had already made up their mind even before the Democrats had chosen someone to run against him. 86%. That was from the exit polls. So anyway, all I'm trying to say is that don't give up too early on our labor movement over here. You're quite right about the...
No, I'm not at all. I'll never give up until my last breath has been and gone. Tell me this: the Democrats held on to Arizona, didn't they, in the election for Mrs. Giffords'
yes,
seat? I don't know any of the numbers. Was it a big victory for the Democrats? Was it unexpected?
Her former chief of staff won 53 to 47. Actually, it was closer to 53.5 to 46.5. So that's pretty big in Arizona for a Democrat. So that's
big, yeah.
Yeah.
That's big, and that's encouraging. And so, what about the spring that's in the step of the Republicans now after Wisconsin? The big fundraising surge, the sense that Romney is actually really in this race. How do you yourself regard that?
Well, here's the scenario. Basically, Romney is running against a fictional character. I have a lot of problems. Let me preface it by saying I have a lot of problems with a lot of the things that Obama has done. However, Romney has created this fictional character, which the so-called mainstream media, in their being objectionable, in their objectivity, have allowed him to create. He has shown himself to be not only a flip-flopper, but a pathological, again, I say that with a lot of experience, George, a pathological liar whose only requirement, it seems, for being able to position himself into being in line for the presidency is that he wants it. He seems to be someone who creates a myth about himself, a myth about the character that he's running against, and the mainstream media going along with it rather than actually questioning him. Obama has run into a scenario, unfortunately, because he sees himself as somehow the Daniel Webster of his times, the great moderator. It's not in his DNA to show a backbone. He's afraid of confrontations, and he constantly allows himself to be boxed in. And people in this country, unfortunately, they're given half of this, half of that. They're given the empirical truth on one side, juxtaposed with profitable spin from the Republicans, and then said, and we'll have to leave it there by the press. So the people don't exactly know who to believe, but you have a guy they're all speaking from the same choir sheet on the Republican side, and the Democrats are basically like a herd of cats, like they usually say. Who was it? I think it was Mark Twain that said, I'm not a member of any regular party, or rather, I'm not a member of any, I forget what the exact thing was. I'm not a member of a regular party. I'm a Democrat. So anyway, this is what's transpiring. There's a lot of money being raised because we have the Citizens United, as you know, George. And, take, for instance, you had two characters running against Romney who basically wouldn't have been in the race for the last several months, except they had two individual billionaire sugar daddies. Romney's.
This is the Koch brothers, yeah?
No. What do you call? You had Santorum, who is being supported by a gentleman in Iowa who's got his main problems. I won't even go into his history, but he's got a checkered, to say the least, history. And then you had this Las Vegas magnate that was keeping in Newt Gingrich alone. He gave him $5 million. His wife gave him $5 million. Their daughter gave a couple of million. That was the only money that he had. He ended up, as soon as this guy pulled out and says, well, we're going to go with Romney, his campaign folded, and he owed tens of thousands of dollars to everybody. So this is unfortunately the way it's going here. And the American public, who is misinformed and seem to be proud of it, don't vote for candidates. They vote for commercials, George, and that's what's transpiring.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know about anybody else, but I found that an absolutely fascinating phone call from Staten Island. Really outstanding. I learned a lot from it.
Could I ask you a question, George?
Abraham Lincoln said, you can't fool all the people all the time, but you may be able to fool enough of the people enough of the time.
Could I ask you a question, George?
If you've got enough commercials and you spend enough money, maybe that will happen. Thanks very much for that call. I've got to press on with a fifth one, though. Ife, do we have a fifth caller on the line?
Yes, you have Johnny from Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Johnny in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where I once spent a wonderful few days. Very good to hear from you. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. Pack your bags and go to Cuba, you Stanley cunt.
You see, Johnny is one of those guys that writes on toilet walls. You call them toilets there, Ife? Lavatory walls. You know, the guy who doesn't have enough guts to stand up and be counted and speak and argue.
Yeah.
Just creeps up and writes on the lavatory wall. Well, that's Johnny.
And he changes his voice each time.
Of course, he has a different name. He has a different name other weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wish he'd stay on the line if he had the guts to stay on the line. I think I recognize his voice, actually. There's some poisonous guy in New York keeps putting up videos about me on YouTube. And he sits there. It's like something out of Taxi Driver, Ife.
Mm-hmm.
He sits there in this vest, what we call a vest. I don't know what you call it. Underwear, under vest. Sits there in this gloomy room. He's bald with big ears. And the things he says about me would make your blood run cold. Maybe that's Johnny.
So you think this is the same guy?
Give me a real call.
Interesting. Well, you have David from the Bronx.
David in the Bronx. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Can we be a little honest? And I think I understand the statement that you made as far as labor in this country. But can we be a little honest when it comes to Wisconsin? The only way...
Yeah, go on.
The only way Walker was able to win is with Democratic support. There is no way that he could have just won with only Republican voters. He had
he got a lot of independents, though, didn't he?
Well, yeah, but he also had to have had Democratic voters. And I think the reason why is because you have many Democrats, and I don't think they're only in Wisconsin, who feels that the Democratic Party is just a little too inclusive. And this is particularly white Democratic voters. And I think they think the Democratic Party is a little too inclusive, and they are feeling more and more isolated. They will go as far as voting against their interests. And you made a great point when you said that they will soon find in Wisconsin that their jobs are gone, although they voted for Walker. But they would rather vote for him because they feel that he's more in tune with white issues, let's be frank, as opposed to the Democratic Party, which is including more people than they thought. So now,
do you mean by too inclusive, David? Do you mean too enthralled to minority interests?
Yes.
To labor?
Yes.
To minority ethnic populations?
Yes. Exactly.
And but you may be right, of course, you know better than me. But is that really true, or is that just their misperception?
I think it's really true because, like I said, even with the independents, there's no way that Walker could have survived that. They can't say that they were confused by Walker's advertising. That's, Mr. Galloway, don't believe that, because the labor voice was loud enough for everyone to understand exactly what the issues were and what was at stake. There is no way, and plus the length of time that everyone in Wisconsin was exposed to the issues and both sides of the issues, there is no way, Mr. Galloway, no way that you could have been confused. It's no matter of there.
Well, I tend to agree. I tend to agree with you about that, David, and I tend to agree that it's a little self-serving for progressive people when they suffer a defeat to put it down entirely to the people being stupid.
Yes.
And having been fooled.
Yes.
Although you can fool some of the people all of the time, to continue the Lincoln metaphor. But listen, it's been great talking to you. That's two wonderful calls in a row, with the exception of little Johnny. I'm sure he's very little. Johnny, who writes on the toilet wall every other week. Ife, do we have another call?
Yes, you have Patrick from New Rochelle.
Hello?
Patrick in New Rochelle. That sounds so exotic. Patrick, go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Galloway. First-time caller, but long-time listener. I'm really glad to be finally able to talk to you. I just wanted to hear your opinion because I've kind of struggled with this issue for a while, and it's something that I really can't find any solace about. I'm 25 now, and I was 4 years ago, I graduated from college and was really motivated by the potential of the Obama presidency and the things that, not really the things that he promised, but what he represented in terms of potentially a political figure that was sensitive to issues that heretofore didn't seem like politicians cared about or would even have any interest in. And the sheer level of disappointment and dejection that me and a lot of my, friends and colleagues feel with respect to not only his inability to match up to his promises, but really with some of the other things that he's done to actually harm and pretty much go against a lot of the things that he says, it's pretty concerning. And I think that as it stands, I feel like Obama and Romney are really two sides of the same coin in that, Obama's a centrist left. But Romney, in spite of, the claims that he's a liar, he's flipping and whatnot, he does seem mostly moderate right in spite of, everything that's been said about him. So what would really be the incentive to want Obama back in office? Because as it stands, the Obama presidency is one that in some cases can even be considered just a slight difference from what could be a Romney presidency. And as shocking as that sounds, it's just there's really not that much Obama hasn't done much to give the assurance that his reelection would give the impression that anything would change. And I wanted to ask you, what would be an incentive to feel that driven and to feel motivated to even want to do anything different for...
Well, Patrick, you sound like an intelligent man to me, and therefore I'm going to hazard a guess that you already know what I'm going to say, and you already know what you've got to say and do in November. Because, frankly, a man who was blind, deaf, dumb, and had been in solitary confinement in Alcatraz for the last 20 years would know that whatever the imperfections of Barack Obama, the prospect of a Mitt Romney right-wing Republican presidency has to be worse. I'm not saying that Obama is good. I'm certainly not saying he was great. He's not even good. But he has to be better, from my point of view, than Mitt Romney. If a man can be judged by his friends, then take a look around at Romney's friends. Take a look around at who is with him, who is backing him. And take a look around at who is, because there's no alternative, backing Obama. And you can see the different forces outline at least the different interests that are at play in the United States election. But let me confine my remarks on this to where I'm sitting from. I'm sitting here in Beirut, in Lebanon, in the middle of the Middle East, and I've got to tell you that the prospect of President Mitt Romney just makes the blood run cold. It's not just his own personal background, although if you've ever heard the Mormons on Israel, you'll be frightened about the future of this area. But the fact that Romney would be a first-term president absolutely enthralled to the interests of the State of Israel and prepared to bear all the consequences, which would be many, I assure you, is like holding a blazing torch to a large tank of petroleum, I must tell you. Now, has Obama been good in the Middle East? He's been atrocious. He's been extremely bad. But there are two caveats to that. He has to be better in a second term when he's no longer dependent on the people that have got him such a terrified rabbit in his first term, because he can't run again for office. So he has to strike out, as Carter and others have been arguing, for a more balanced American policy in the Middle East. And number two, the truth is that President Obama knows the truth about Palestine. He knows the truth about the Middle East. He doesn't have the alibi that the last guy, George Bush, had of being an idiot. Obama is a genius compared to George W. Bush. And he's a genius compared to Mitt Romney. And the truth is, Obama knows what needs to be done in the Middle East. He always knew it. He's too cowardly to have done it in the first term, but we have to assume that he can't be as bad in the first term on this question as he can't be as bad in the second term as he's been in the first. So for all of these reasons, Patrick, I appeal to you, even if you've got to hold your nose, go into the ballot station in November and cast your vote for President Obama. That's not WBAI's point of view. They're not allowed to have a point of view. That's George Galloway's point of view, and I am allowed to have a point of view, and no one will ever take it off me. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's George Galloway. It's WBAI. Ife.
Fighting the golden flakes of change with the milk of human kindness. This is the mother of all talk shows, and George Galloway.
Mr. President, that made no sense whatsoever.
I know. That's why I said it.
Well, these jingles are saying it all, actually. At least we call them jingles or stings. I don't know what you call them over there. You know, remember that we're two peoples separated by a common language. You say tomato, I say tomato. But let's not call the whole thing off, Ife. Let's go on to the next call.
Yes, you have Patio from Harlem.
Harlem. Always great to talk to Harlem. Patio, go ahead.
Yes, Patio, yes. I'm calling because something has been worrying me for quite a long time, and that is the symbiotic relationship between Al Jazeera, which is, of course, Qatar and the fiefdom of Qatar, with Pacifica or BAI. And what is worrying me is what, Qatar, the Emir had indicated to put Qatar on the world map of importance. And from there, of course, Al Jazeera and everything, took up. And now, Amy Goodman can't make any comment about the Middle East without, of course, taking a cue or quoting from Al Jazeera. And even BAI, sort of worries everybody with a deluge of 30 minutes Al Jazeera, and then with the morning show with another. So it is just for me, and a lot of my friends, what is going on with BAI, with Pacifica?
Well, look, I can't comment on Pacifica, although I would comment if I knew what you were talking about. It's not that I'm scared to comment, but I can't comment on it because I really don't know what you're talking about in that regard. Pacifica, Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, and so on. The last time I looked were all a good thing. But Al Jazeera is a bad thing. Al Jazeera has committed journalistic suicide, and its English language station even more dramatically than its Arabic language station. And the reason why the Al Mayadeen, from which I'm speaking to you now, has emerged with such a bang, 7 million viewers in the first 2 hours, is because Al Jazeera has committed journalistic suicide, has absolutely zero credibility, except amongst those who share its hardline pro-American, pro-Zionist agenda. Everybody in the Arab world knows that fine. Nobody's confused about that. Al Jazeera is losing staff, it's losing executives, it's losing, above all, viewers by the million as each month goes by since this act of journalistic suicide began just over a year ago, when Al Jazeera sacked a good friend of mine, Wadah, who was running the station. They sacked him and replaced him by a Qatari prince who doesn't even know how to turn a television on by himself. He's got servants to do that, let alone how to run a television station. They sacked Wadah. Ghassan bin Jiddo, who is the boss of this station now, Al Mayadeen, one of the stars of Al Jazeera, left denouncing this act of journalistic suicide that they have embarked upon. And people are coming across, anchors, researchers, producers, directors. My own producer, for example, is ex-Al Jazeera, and my own director is ex-Al Jazeera. And everyone's bailing out, everyone's jumping ship off Al Jazeera, leaving only the rats behind. So that's my view. And if Amy is too close to Al Jazeera, I advise her to look again at the nature of that relationship. But I have no idea if how you characterize that relationship is correct or not, and I quickly add that. Now, Ife, give me, please, call number 9.
Sure. You have Zippy from right here in NYC.
Zippy in New York, welcome. Go ahead.
Hello, George. I hope you can hear me. I'm in a bad place to talk. I'm sorry. When I called before,
I can hear you. Okay, go ahead.
No. Let me call you back, okay?
Okay, yeah, because it began to get a bit difficult there. Give me another call then,
yes.
please, while we're trying to get back to him.
Yes, you have Dr. Block again from William Patterson University in New Jersey.
George, I want to wish you congratulations on your success. What I want to say, I want to talk about the American culture. Maybe that will help people. When I began teaching, before I got my doctorate, years ago in New Jersey, it was in the 1950s, New Jersey was one of 3 states that would not permit corporal punishment of students in school. Now look at 2012. I think there are 37 states that permit corporal punishment, which means that children are taught to behave, to listen to the teacher, what the book says is correct and no deviation, and you'll get smacked or punishment if you don't listen to orders that are given. Now, I'm saying really that if textbooks being used, and I haven't examined the newest textbooks for the elementary or the high school, if they ignore the New Deal, if they ignore other ways of helping the economy, and then students have very little opportunity to learn about how to improve the economy in the world. And I'm worried that kids who say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. Well, I'll give you an example. When I was teaching last semester, I asked students to compose creative questions on their own, not to take questions from the text. I teach Western Civ, which is required since I'm retired. And many students came up with good creative questions on how incidents in the past have been related to what is happening now. But there are others who must find what does the author say on such a page, and whatever is said, that look for the answer. These are questions students raised, not I. So I'm sharing with you that in a culture in which kids are trained to be yes men, yes, no sir, yes sir, how can they open their minds to new ideas? And I've been struggling with that, and I try to do the best I can. But even in a state like New Jersey, which doesn't allow,
shared it with me and
still
with
that
the
problem.
Worldwide audience for this show on the internet and, of course, in the tri-state area, Dr. Block. I couldn't put what you said better than you did, and I won't try to do so. Suffice to say, I entirely agree and endorse every point that you made. I want to try and get a few more calls in because 10's not good enough, and one of those was Johnny, the lavatory wall painter. So give me an 11th, please, Aoife.
Sure, you have Paul from Staten Island.
Yes, hello.
Paul in Staten Island. I'm going down well in Staten Island today, Paul. Go ahead.
I want to try to be as nice as possible, but at the Occupy, it's really just a Mickey Mouse operation of pseudo-intellectuals from NYU. And number 2, I wanted to say about Obama. I mean, if he's passing the National Defense Authorization Act, I don't know how anyone could defend that as being an alternative, any kind of possibility for a good president.
And so you're viewing with equanimity. You're quite sanguine, Paul, about President Mitt Romney, are you?
No, I think we don't have a choice. We have no choices. We need an alternative movement.
Well, you do have a choice. There's unfortunately only 2 options in it.
Yes, and the alternative, there's just no alternative movement in America. It's finished. I mean, it's been totally co-opted. If you look at the unions, they're completely incapable of fostering any kind of challenge whatsoever.
Well, Paul, I suspect that you're a particularly misanthropic resident of Staten Island, so I'll quickly pass over that pessimism because I want to end the show on a bit more of a high. Aoife, have we got Anybody more cheerful for call number 12?
Well, you have Ron from Buffalo, New York.
Ron in Buffalo, New York. That sounds like my kind of guy, my kind of place. Go ahead, Ron.
Boy, George, I really like your show, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I think the last two callers that were on here, they scare me in the sense that, and I tend not to want to agree with them, but to be very depressed over the situation. I called you 6 weeks ago and asked you this question, and in light of what you said about Greece, about the possibility of a European economic collapse going toward fascism rather than toward progressivism, I had asked you, do you think that's possible in the United States before the fundraiser at WBAI had, and you said you don't think so. Now, in light of recent events with the Wisconsin debacle and with these right-wing organizations that seem to be speaking with one voice, and I wonder, how can you maintain optimism? I mean, I'll put it in that way. How can you maintain optimism that we can avoid, even in the United States, where we don't even have a socialist party or a real far-left alternative? We've got this kind of bourgeois Democratic Party that seems to be scared of its own shadow, and then we have the far right that vote in lockstep, the Christian right organizations within that, a radical Tea Party, militia groups. How do we stay optimistic?
Well, a very good point, Ron. I don't think I contradicted myself for these reasons. There is no serious history of fascism in the United States. There is in Europe, and there is in Greece. And there is a party that is explicitly fascist that got, I think, 7 or 8% of the vote in the elections just a few weeks ago, and we'll see what they get in the next one. There is a long tradition of fascist rule in Europe, in Spain, in Portugal, in Germany, of course, and in Italy, with big fascist parties able to win elected office, even though they are explicitly Hitler-worshipping Nazis. None of that obtains in the United States. It's true that there are no elected communists in the United States, while there are the French Communist Party has 9,000 elected officials in the country. So it's true that the polarization exists in Europe, but so does the danger of fascism. I don't myself believe it's the most likely outcome. The left is doing much better than the far right in Europe, but that doesn't guarantee that it will always be that way. In the United States, politics is much less polarized because, as you say, you have a fake polarization between two parties that, in fact, are not all that different from each other, though one is worse than the other, as I have been consistently saying, and nobody to the left and really nobody to the right of them. So what I was cautioning you, Ron, when we spoke 6 weeks ago, and I recall it now, was that we mustn't call something fascism when it isn't. We mustn't talk our way into fascism by desensitizing, rather, people to the possibility of it. You have a constitution, which is more than we've got. We don't have a constitution. You have rights, albeit ones that are under attack and are being chipped away, but you still have them. You still have a spirit abroad in the United States. Whatever you do overseas, which is not usually very good, in your own internal political life, you are determined to retain at least the basics of democracy. That's my view, Ron. It remains my view, and unfortunately, I can't let you back in to express yours about mine because, well, we're running very, very short of time now. I hope that the weakness of the line has not been such that it has spoiled the show for you. Next Wednesday, God willing, at the same time, in the same place, I'll be back on the ISDN line from London, and everything should be a whole lot clearer for both of us. Until then, I wish you a very good day in New York, and I wish you and all the listeners at WBAI every success in your lives. And may you all go in peace. Ife, London calling, please, even though I'm in Beirut. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows.